This is Lecture 2, Chemistry of Life, and this corresponds to the textbook Concepts of Biology, Chapter 2. So hopefully by the end of this lecture, you'll be able to describe the ways in which water is critical to life, describe the 4 major types of biological molecules, and understand the functions of the 4 major types of molecules. So food in general, why do we need to eat? Because all of our cells need certain things to function. So that's, why we eat. Food provides an organism with nutrients, the matter it needs to survive. And many of these critical nutrients come in the form of biological macromolecules or large molecules that are necessary for life. And these macromolecules are built from different combinations of smaller organic molecules. So yeah, this lecture is going to be a little bit like chemistry heavy, but this isn't a chemistry class, this is a biology class, so you mainly have to focus on just the big picture. So yeah, this is covering chemistry topics, but why does it matter? Why does it relate to biology? Because we need different molecules for our cells and for our big picture like metabolism and things like that. So we kind of have to start small. What are molecules? Why are they important? And then as we move forward, it'll kind of make more and more sense. So to start with the smallest element. So everything is made of atoms. Atoms make up elements. So when we talk about elements, we're talking about different kinds of atoms. So each element has a chemical symbol and its own unique properties. So elements are different because they consist of different atoms that have different components of them. So each element has its own unique properties, and those properties are what allow elements to combine and bond with each other in specific ways. So when you think about the periodic table of elements that you've probably seen in classrooms or in the media or whatever, so this is like a representation of all the different elements, and it's actually organized very specifically to kind of describe the way that they are able to interact with each other. So yeah, we won't get too much into the nitty gritty of atoms and protons and neutrons and electrons. Your textbooks, cover that. But as far as we're concerned, it's more about how it relates to the big picture. So the basic point is that each element has its own unique characteristics, and that affects how it interacts with other elements and other atoms. So all organisms are made of a combination of elements that join to form molecules. And in multicellular organisms, these molecules can interact to form cells. And multiple cells interact to form tissues, which then make up organs, and so on and so forth. So that's the big picture. Why do we kind of care about chemistry? Because organisms are made of atoms, which make molecules, which make the cells and make the tissues and organ systems and all that. So it is all related. So each atom, interacts in a unique way. And so there are different possible kinds of bonds in molecules. So here are some examples of different kinds of bonds. Again, we won't really get into the nitty-gritty of them. But there are different kinds of bonds, different ways that atoms will share electrons with each other and interact with each other, and then that will form a molecule, and those molecules also have unique properties that will tell it how to interact with other molecules. So these are just a few of the kinds of bonds. There are polar covalent bonds. So covalent bonds, again, I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but this is a bond that can be either polar or non-polar covalent bonds. So polar covalent bonds means that one part of the molecule will have more of a positive charge to it, and one part of the molecule will have a negative charge to it. And again, that's just because of the way those atoms interact with each other. So those are polar covalent bonds. If you think about like, the North and South Pole, like they're at the most extreme ends of, the planet. And so that's why we say like, the North Pole is directly opposite from the South Pole. And they're kind of like, polar opposites is also a saying. So polar covalent bonds, one part of the molecule will be kind of positively charged and one part of the molecule will be kind of negatively charged. Yeah. So those are polar covalent bonds. Non-polar covalent bonds are bonds, but there's no positive or negative area of the molecule. It's like overall pretty neutral. So non-polar. So that's another kind of covalent bond. And then here's another example of a non-polar covalent bond between two oxygen molecules. So again, big picture, atoms and, the atoms of different elements will interact in unique ways to form molecules, and that does affect how those molecules affect or interact with other molecules. So a big important molecule that we rely on for life is water. So water is necessary for life. It's a big important concept. We always think about looking for life on other planets based on whether or not there's water or was water there. So why? Why does it matter if there's water there? Because it really is essential to life. So even tiny traces of it on another planet can indicate that life could or did exist on that planet. So that's why we look for any like sign of water as a sign potentially of life. And again, it's kind of just based on the molecule and the unique properties of the molecule. So water is important because it just happens to have some really cool, interesting characteristics, and that's what makes it so important to life. So water is one of the more abundant molecules in living cells and the most critical to life. So 60 to 70% of your body is made of water. That's how important it is. Without water, life just would not exist. So what things about water make it so important? What makes water so special? So water is a polar molecule. So like I mentioned, there's like positive and negative parts of it. Water helps stabilize temperature. Water is an excellent solvent, and water is cohesive. So I'm gonna, go into each of these points in the following slides to kind of explain why. But these 4 things are what make water so special, and that's why you're supposed to drink water, because it's important. So water is polar. So the molecule has areas that are more positive and then areas that are more negative, and that characteristic about one water molecule affects how it interacts with other molecules, including other water molecules or other things. So each water molecule attracts other water molecules because the positive area of one water molecule, where the hydrogens are, is going to be kind of more like attracted to the negative charges on the different parts of another molecule. So how they say like opposites attract, in chemistry, that's pretty true. So positive charge areas are going to be attracted to the negatively charged areas, and that's going to form a new kind of bond called a hydrogen bond. Again, we don't really need to know, but just the point of that some characteristics again of the molecule affect how it interacts with other molecules. So the fact that water is polar is a big deal because that affects how it interacts with other water molecules and also other molecules. So because water is polar, it also affects how those water molecules interact with other things. So there are some substances like other molecules and substances like bigger picture that can dissolve easily in water, and we would call those hydrophilic or water loving. So if you break down the word hydro relates to water, and philic means loving. So substances that can dissolve pretty easily in water are hydrophilic. And when a substance can't dissolve easily in water, it's called hydrophobic. So hydro, again, meaning water, and then phobic, meaning fearing. So like if you have a phobia, you kind of tend to stay away from it. You don't mix well with it. Hydrophobic substances don't mix well with water. So for example, oil is non-polar, and because of that, it doesn't mix well with water. So it is hydrophobic. Oil is hydrophobic. If you ever try to mix like oil and water in like a water bottle, it'll never mix because the molecules just don't mix well together. So another important characteristic of water is that it stabilizes temperature. So again, because of the way that water molecules interact with each other, they can make and break bonds between each other really quickly. And so that feature kind of helps absorb energy, and its temperature only changes slightly. So I know this is kind of, like complicated. Again, we don't really have to get into like the chemistry of it, but just the fact that you can absorb energy by making and breaking these bonds. And so that takes in energy and heat from the environment and kind of helps like sink it somewhere. So in the big picture, water helps moderate temperature changes within organisms and then also in their environments. So again, if it's like a hot day, like it kind of has been, then you will drink water to help cool down because the water molecules will absorb that heat and kind of help dissipate it and moderate temperature changes like within you. And then also the big picture in the environment, if you tend to go towards the beach and like the coastline, it's a little bit cooler, right? The weather is cooler than it would be over here in the Inland Empire because of that body of water. That water is all taking in heat and kind of just like absorbing it, and that way there's less heat like going out into the environment. So yeah, that's a big deal for water and its ability to support life. Another characteristic is that water is an excellent solvent. So because again it's polar, it's able to dissolve things pretty easily because it has those areas of like positive and negative. It's pretty easy to dissolve things like molecules, other molecules that are also positive or negative. They like mix well. The positive area of a water molecule will be attracted to the negative of something. So those things will mix easily with water. So for example, table salt is made of two elements mixed together, and then when you dissolve salt in water, it dissolves pretty easily. It should break down because the different parts of those molecules will be attracted to different parts of the water molecules. And so water is what we call a solvent, like you can mix things in it and it'll mix pretty well. So that's another important thing about water. So for example, like if oil is not important to life necessarily because it can't do things like this, and this is actually a pretty important characteristic. So yeah, in your body, like we have so much water in our bodies, it's really, really awesome that water is also an excellent solvent because you can kind of like use that to carry around things in your body, if that makes sense. So another reason we drink water, because your cells are like mostly made of water and they can have stuff like mixed in with the water and existing within your cells. So the last characteristic is that water is cohesive. So water molecules, like I said, are kind of attracted to other water molecules. And so sometimes like the added up attraction of all those bonds will kind of make water not breakable. Does that make that doesn't make sense? Let me just read the slide. So the weight of a needle, for example, if you were to like gently put a needle on the surface of like a cup of water, it'll stay there. It won't break the bonds that will then have it sink. So the weight of this needle on top of the water, there is again that like connection between all the water molecules here that adds up in what we call surface tension. So the weight of this needle is not enough to break the surface tension. It pulls it downwards, but then also the water is kind of like building up surface tension that keeps it up on top, and so it's not sinking. So that is also pretty important if we think about like plants. So plants, you have to be able to pull the water like from below, from the roots, all the way up to the leaves So surface tension of water kind of helps do that. Like if all the water molecules kind of help pull each other up, then that is also another important part of life. Because again, we all depend on energy from autotrophs. So that feature of water that lets that happen in autotrophs is like really important. So another thing to mention about chemistry and as it relates to biology is the pH scale. So the pH scale measures the amount of hydrogen ions in a substance. So stuff can dissolve in water, like I mentioned, and so some things dissolve and give off their hydrogen ions. And so if there's more hydrogen ions, then there is a higher number on the pH scale. And it's logarithmic. We don't have to get into it, but it's a measurement of how many ions something gives off. And so that's also a pretty important concept because in your body and like the things that you take in and things like that, those can alter the pH. So the neutral pH is 7. So usually water will be pH 7. It's kind of like really well balanced. And if you have something that's more acidic, it'll be lower on the pH scale. So for example, urine is pretty acidic, and then going, down. Black coffee is pretty acidic, coffee juice, orange juice. This is all stuff that gives me acid reflux because it's acidic stuff, right? So stuff that is more acidic will be lower on the pH scale, and stuff that is more basic or alkaline will be higher on the pH scale. So seawater is actually a little bit more alkaline or basic. Baking soda, milk of magnesia, ammonia, soapy water, and bleach, those things are like more higher and higher on the pH scale, more basic or alkaline. Right now there's kind of a fad of alkaline water, and I don't really recommend it. It really, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference basically. So you can like maybe bottle it so that it has a higher pH slightly. But once you open it, it's exposed to the environment, and there's no guarantee that it's going to be alkaline by the time you drink it. And even if you do, there are no additional benefits to just pure distilled, pH 7 water. Like that's actually what we want, and what our body counts on. So when it comes to alkaline water, it's not that I don't recommend it, it just doesn't make a difference. So another important element is carbon. So we say, carbon-based life forms. And that's because literally like living things, a lot of their molecules are based on that element carbon. A lot of their molecules are made with that element carbon. So carbon can form 4 different bonds with other atoms to create a molecule. And that's pretty cool. It's very versatile. It can work with a lot of different atoms and make a lot of different kinds of molecules. Versus some elements, like they just don't bond with that many. So carbon just happens to make these 4 different kinds of bonds, and that gives it a lot of versatility. So that's why it makes so many different things in your body. So carbon atoms bonded to other carbon atoms or other elements form the fundamental components of many, if not most, of the molecules in living things. So yeah, it's another important molecule. So macromolecules are big, large molecules. Even though this molecule of methane is a molecule, it's very, very small. So macromolecules are large molecules that are built, from multiple atoms and elements. And these macromolecules are large molecules necessary for life that are built from the smaller organic molecules. So macro means like big picture. Macromolecules are big molecules. And they are what we call polymers. So polymers are larger molecules, and they're built from smaller building blocks that we call monomers. So yeah, the big molecules are made from the smaller molecules that we call monomers. So when it comes to biology, there are 4 major macromolecules that we care about because they make the biggest amount of stuff in your cells and in your body. Like they are really important macromolecules that do a lot for you. So the 4 major macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So some of these might sound familiar, you know, carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins are things that we consume through our food. And you'll usually see, if you read like a nutrition label of things, you will be able to see, you know, the makeup of like the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, how much are in there. So again, tying this small little topic to the big picture, we're talking about these molecules, and at first it might seem like so remote, like who cares about this? But like I said, these macromolecules make up a big part of your cells, and your cells need them to survive and do things in your body, and so that's why we have to consume them, because we need them. So number 1, carbohydrates. These are big molecules that are long chains of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Here are just a few examples. These are actually like simpler carbohydrates. So glucose is the kind of simplest carbohydrate. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons, and then, you know, oxygens and hydrogens attached to those. And these other molecules, they look pretty similar, but they're just different enough to actually, you know, be considered different molecules. So that's why it has another name. So glucose looks like this, and a tiny change in where, you know, certain groups are will make a difference. And so that's why this is now galactose, because it has one of these oxygens on the same side versus the other side. So yeah, even small tiny differences make it a whole different molecule. So this is a different carbohydrate. This is a different carbohydrate, fructose, because this double bond with oxygen is over here. So these are what we call monosaccharides. So if we break down the word mono, means one. Saccharine means sweet. So if you ever hear that term like saccharin, like something is like overly sweet, like it's way too like, it's like grossly sweet. Yeah, so that part of that word means sweet. So monosaccharide, because it's like a simple sugar. So yeah, we call these guys simple sugars or monosaccharides. And like I said, the most common is glucose. They can exist like a long chain like this, or they could form like a little ring. So you'll see them in the shape of little rings, usually because they'll form the rings in like a water environment. So those are monosaccharides or simple sugars. And you could build more complex carbohydrates based on how many you add together. So disaccharides have 2, di meaning 2. They have 2 little sugars connected to each other. And then polysaccharides, poly means many. So that's a lot of little simple sugars connected together. So to the right here are examples of polysaccharides. They're longer chains with multiple sugars. So for example, starch, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sugar rings. So it's a polysaccharide, there's more than one. Cellulose looks similar, but again, different enough to be a different molecule. Glycogen is a kind of, you know, a little bit more complex. So we kind of care about these because carbohydrates provide energy. They provide energy in things that you eat. And in this molecule, there's energy in those bonds. So that's why they're kind of our energy source. And then if we take in enough glucose and energy, then we, you know, use those to power stuff that we need to do with our body. And then if we don't use it all, then we can kind of convert and rebuild molecules to store that energy in the form of plants use starch. So if you think about like starchy vegetables, they have this molecule called starch. And then in animals, we store sugar in the form of glycogen. So this molecule called glycogen we kind of store, and then if we need more energy for activities, then we can break down that bigger molecule into glucose. So as it relates to, again, the bigger picture, carbohydrates and nutrition, during digestion, when we eat, digestible carbs are broken down into that simple sugar glucose, and used to provide energy within the cells of the body. So a lot of different things require energy that your body does, and we will get more into that in, I think, the next lecture. So we do need carbs because our bodies depend on the glucose for energy. Yeah. So even though they get a bad rap, like, carbohydrates do a necessary thing. They provide you with energy. So during your digestion, the carbs that you can digest and break down are broken down into glucose and then used to provide that energy to the cells of the body. There are some carbs that we can't digest. So for example, in like plants, they make cellulose. So this is this molecule right here. So they make cellulose, and we don't have the enzymes to break down cellulose. So that is what we call fiber or dietary fiber. And so that is helpful for us to still eat, even though we can't break it down. It kind of helps, like they say, keep us regular. So, you know, some people take Metamucil to help provide that kind of fiber, and it's cellulose. So it still kind of provides a function, even though we can't digest it and break it down. It's still helpful because it helps like clear out our system and things like that. And if we consume like too many carbs, like more than we're using, then excess sugars are stored for later use to help fuel prolonged exercise and provide energy during food shortages. So our body kind of like takes that energy and stores it in the form of other molecules. So like I said, big picture, carbohydrates are still like pretty important to take in because they provide energy to your body. It's when you provide more than you're using up that ends up like it having to be stored. So lipids are another group of chemical or macromolecule. They have very diverse structures. There's lots of carbons and hydrogens. And so what makes these all in this group, like fall under this group, are the fact that they are hydrophobic, so they're water fearing. So again, because of like the features of the molecules themselves, they interact with other stuff differently. So these macromolecules are hydrophobic, water fearing. They don't mix well with water. So if you think of stuff that doesn't mix well with water, like oils are a kind of lipid. Other things that are like fall under the category of lipids include fats, oils, waxes, phospholipids, and steroids. So yeah, even though these things can be very different and there's different kinds of lipids, they all fall under lipids. So if you think about things that are, yeah, like hard to mix with water, those are usually lipids. And for example, it's kind of funny. So my cat has irritable bowel syndrome. And so they prescribed him some steroids because those are like kind of anti-inflammatory for, you know, to help regulate all that. And so the steroids, every time I give it to him, like the bottle itself gets really greasy. Like if it falls on the counter or the little like dropper thingy, like it gets really, really greasy because it's a lipid. It is hydrophobic. So I always, you know, nerd out and think like, oh, that's so interesting. Like even though it's really inconvenient, like it's a lipid. So it makes sense that it's like hydrophobic. And even if you rinse your hands, it won't like come off easy. You have to, you know, wash it with soap. Because again, it's hydrophobic. It's not just going to mix with water and come off. Yeah, so steroids are hydrophobic along with other things like fats, oils, and waxes. Yeah. So we'll talk about fats because again, that kind of relates more towards our bigger picture as humans and our nutrition and things like that. So a fat molecule, like a triglyceride, has two main components. This part of it called glycerol, which is these three carbons on the left, and then fatty acids, which are all these branches on the right of this molecule. So triglycerides you might have heard of if you get like a lipid panel done in your blood work. You know, if you go in for your annual exam and you get a lipid panel, it gives you readings about different kinds of molecules, like your cholesterol, which is a steroid, and different like fats and things in your blood. So a triglyceride
has 3 fatty acids. So here's a picture of a triglyceride. There's 3 fatty acid chains. Tri meaning 3. So yeah, triglycerides are another big molecule that are relevant to us because we kind of have to measure how much is in it, how much is in our bloodstream, and how much we're taking in, if it's like an excess and things like that. So fats and fatty acids, so the fatty acids are those long chains. So fatty acids can be saturated or unsaturated. So again, you might have heard of this as it relates to food. So saturated fatty acids are saturated with hydrogen. If you look at this molecule versus the bottom one, there are as many as possible hydrogens on this molecule. There's 2 for each one in the middle of the chain. So there's as many hydrogens as possible. Versus unsaturated fats, unsaturated fatty acids, because there's a double bond, there are a little bit less hydrogens. So if you were to add up all the hydrogens on the top molecule, the number would be higher than the number of hydrogens down here because of the double bond. There can't be that many hydrogens. So saturated or saturated with hydrogen. Unsaturated is, not saturated with hydrogen. It has a double bond. So this is important because unsaturated fats help improve blood cholesterol levels, while saturated fats contribute to plaque formation in the arteries and increases the risk of a heart attack. So in other words, unsaturated fats good, saturated fats bad. So when you read the nutrition label, if you see saturated and unsaturated fats, I think it'll usually list the saturated fats, because they have to disclose how much saturated fats are in here for you to make your decision on like, well, is this the best thing for me to eat? Yeah. So another thing, if you notice on this molecule, there is the double bond in the unsaturated fats, and the hydrogens happen to be on the same side in this molecule. So this is a fatty acid that's unsaturated. But when in the food industry, oils are artificially hydrogenated. So they will add hydrogens through this whole process. And during this process, if they're adding hydrogens to kind of make it not saturated, it will still change the molecule in a way that will make a difference in your body. So during this process, the orientation around the double bonds is changed. So instead of the 2 hydrogens being on the same side, so cis in chemistry means same, like there's 2 things on the same side of the molecule. So a cis fat has the 2 hydrogens on the same side. If they do this artificially hydrogenated oil, process, then it'll change it into a trans fat. So now the hydrogens are on the opposite side of the molecules to each other. And even though that's a tiny difference, like it's still technically kind of the same molecule, the fact that the molecule is different makes a difference. It makes a difference in the shape and how it's going to interact with other molecules. So yeah, this changes the chemical properties of the molecules. So cis fats are kind of like more normal. And then trans fats are a process or like a byproduct of these artificially hydrogenated processes. So trans fats, now the fact that it's a different orientation makes a difference, and it's kind of worse for you. So recent studies have shown that an increase in trans fats in the diet can lead to an increase in levels of this protein called low-density lipoprotein, or bad cholesterol, which may lead to, again, plaque deposition in the arteries and heart disease. So trans fats, bad, because they will lead to like the bad cholesterol, and that can lead to heart disease. So another thing that is relevant to what we eat and what will be listed on the nutrition facts, it'll say the amount of saturated fats and then also trans fats because of this risk of, it possibly leading to heart disease. So in general, again, big picture, lipids and nutrition. So what we kind of is most relevant to us is fats. Fats are stored under the skin of mammals for insulation and long-term energy storage. So that's why we kind of try to limit carbs, because if you have too many carbs in the long term, it'll get stored in fat. Yeah. And fatty acids, but like fats do provide a purpose in our bodies and in our cells. So they're not all bad. Some fats are still kind of necessary in your diet because they actually do function in your cells. Fatty acids are required for cell membranes, and they're also required to help absorb fat-soluble vitamins and the production of fat-soluble hormones. So some stuff is only made and like dissolved in fats, and so that kind of helps your body like absorb and make those things. So fats do have an important function. So healthy, unsaturated fats in moderate amounts should still be consumed on a regular basis. It's just better, like if you can, opt for things that are unsaturated and don't have trans fats. Now, proteins are another big, thing that we hear about when it comes to our diet. But in chemistry, proteins are molecules that are made of amino acids. So those are smaller molecules, amino acids. And you link amino acids together to make proteins. There's 4 levels of protein structure. We won't go into super detail, but just to show you that like the long chain of amino acids, each one of those is a molecule that will interact with each other in different ways. So as that long chain of amino acids like folds and interacts with each other, then those folds will also interact with each other. And so there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of protein structure. And each protein is different. It has its own unique sequence of amino acids in order. So you could think of like amino acids like letters in the alphabet. There's only so many, but the different combinations make a bunch of different kinds of possible words and possible proteins. So each protein has its own unique sequence, and the shape is held together by the chemical interactions between all those molecules. And then the shape of a protein is really important to its function. Like what it does is specifically related to its structure. So proteins do a lot of different stuff in your body, but a lot of different things in your body. So we need protein in our diet, and we always think of, protein like meats, chicken, fish, beef, pork, protein. So we get proteins literally from our food. The proteins in our food are broken down during digestion, and they're broken back down into those little molecules, amino acids. Those amino acids get absorbed, and then they're reused to build new proteins in your body. Your body uses like a bunch of proteins for a lot of different things. Your cells use them for different things. So we need to eat protein because of our cells, like literally needing proteins. There are some amino acids that we can make on our own. Our body can kind of like break down other molecules and make amino acids. But there are some things that we can't make. So certain amino acids have to be provided from food and can't be made by the body, and these are called essential amino acids. So it is pretty good to have like a balanced diet because you need to be able to get those essential amino acids. And then the last group is pretty straightforward. So the last group of macromolecules are called nucleic acids. And they only have one job, and that is to carry the genetic blueprint of a cell and carry instructions for the functioning of the cell. So like your DNA is a type of nucleic acid. There's also another kind called RNA. And so they're both nucleic acids, and they basically are just in charge of this one thing. They're like the instruction manual for how to make everything that your body needs.
everything that every single cell needs, everything that in the big picture your body needs, what you look like. Yeah. So that's the one job that nucleic acids have to do. And they are built from these smaller molecules called nucleotides. And yeah, that's basically it. Like, they don't do like a bunch of different other things. Like, this is their one job. They're really important and really relevant to this one job. So again, in the big picture, these macromolecules are important because they are things that function in each of your cells. So that's why we need to get them in our diet. So for humans, a balanced diet includes fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and dairy. And we need, like a balanced diet because we need to be able to get like the full mix, the full complement of all those different molecules, and not just like way too much of one thing and not enough of some others. So we need, a balanced diet. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more now with like this picture in mind, feel free to explore the interactive USDA website to learn more about like the macromolecules in each food group and the recommended daily amounts. Because again, it's kind of interesting and it's really relevant to us in our daily lives, and knowing the importance of what our body needs, because that's what our cells need, and then our organs and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the big picture of the chemistry of life.